The crop is finished, the pot is empty, and the clock is already running. Every week that container waits is growing time. You will not get back this season. That may sound dramatic, but think about what usually happens after a successful harvest. You pull the last radishes, cut the tired lettuce, or remove the pea vines. You shake off the loose potting mix, stack the support against a wall, and tell yourself you will decide what to grow next in a few days. Then, a week passes. Maybe you need seed. Maybe the seed is still in a drawer. Maybe you order a transplant. Maybe you finally sow, and now the new crop still has to germinate before it even begins using the space. The harvest was successful, but the growing time after it was not. I think of that as the empty pot gap. It is the quiet stretch between one crop leaving and the next crop truly getting started. In a large garden, one open corner may not feel urgent. On a patio with 6 containers, 2 empty pots can make the entire garden feel as though it has slowed down. The important question is not only, what can I plant in this pot? The better question is, what should already be waiting for this pot before the current crop is finished? That one change in timing is the heart of succession planting in a small container garden. And no, I am not going to give you one calendar month and pretend it works everywhere in America. January in Florida is not January in Minnesota. A spring afternoon in coastal California is not the same growing signal as a spring afternoon in Wisconsin. We are going to watch the plant that is already in the container, the temperature trend that is arriving next, your average frost dates, and the number of useful growing days still available. Sometimes, the replacement crop should be started in a small nursery pot. Sometimes, it should be direct sown the same day the container opens. Sometimes the best decision is to reject a combination completely because your warm season is too short or your first frost is too close. A good succession system does not force the garden to follow a list. It uses the list to help you read the season. And before we reach fall, you will see why waiting until harvest can be much too late for the next crop. For now, imagine the containers in cool spring weather. The potting mix stays moist longer. Spinach is full. Radishes are swelling. Lettuce looks clean and tender. Pea vines are climbing. It is easy to believe the garden will keep moving on its own. It will not. So, let us begin where the first handoffs are easiest to see, while the weather is still cool and the containers are about to change jobs. Start with spinach moving into bush beans. Do not wait for the spinach to become completely ugly. Watch the center of the plant and the quality of the leaves. As the weather warms, spinach can begin stretching upward, and the leaves you once loved may become tougher or less pleasant. The exact day will vary with variety and climate, but the signal is clear. The cool weather crop is beginning to lose the conditions that made it productive. At that point, bush beans should already be in your plan. If your local frost risk has passed and the potting mix has warmed, you can direct sow beans into a container that is ready for them. For a small grouping of bush beans, a 5-gallon container gives you a practical starting size, although wider containers make spacing and moisture management easier. After removing the old spinach roots, loosen the upper 4 to 6 inches of mix. Check that the drainage holes are still open. Replace badly compacted material, level the surface, and sow the beans about 1 inch deep according to the spacing on your seed packet. Notice what really made this handoff work. The beans did not arrive simply because the spinach left. The spinach is leaving because its cool window is closing, and the beans are arriving because a warmer window is opening. That is the first pattern I want you to remember. Now move to a larger container holding spring radishes. This is where a patio tomato can take over. A big mistake is keeping a tomato container empty for weeks because the gardener thinks the tomato owns the pot from the first day of spring. It does not. If the container is large enough for the tomato you plan to grow, that space can carry a quick, cool season crop first. For many container tomatoes, think in terms of a substantial container rather than a decorative flower pot. A practical range is often around 8 to 10 gallons or more for compact types, with roughly 12 to 16 inches of usable depth. Larger indeterminate tomatoes may need considerably more root volume and stronger support. The radishes finish quickly. Pull them while the roots are still tender. Remove broken root pieces and inspect the mix. Do not dig so aggressively that you destroy the entire structure of the container, but do open the planting zone where the tomato will go. If the mix has settled, add fresh potting mix. If the previous crop was lightly fed and the new crop will be a tomato, follow a fertilizer plan appropriate for the tomato, rather than assuming the old container has everything it needs. Then transplant the patio tomato after local frost danger has passed and warm season conditions are settling in. Set the support early. A cage or stake installed at planting is much easier than trying to force one around a larger plant later. The important lesson is not radishes and tomatoes are magic together. The lesson is that a large, warm season container does not have to sit idle while you wait for tomato weather. Now, look at spring lettuce moving into cucumber. This is one of my favorite handoffs because the container keeps the same location, but its job changes completely. A low bowl of lettuce asks for one kind of management. A cucumber asks for more root space, stronger support, closer water monitoring, and a much warmer growing window. So before you transplant a cucumber, do not look at the empty space and assume the container is ready just because the lettuce came out this morning. Remove the lettuce roots. Loosen the upper 4 to 6 inches. Check the drainage. If the container is shallow or tiny, stop right there. Move the cucumber to a deeper, larger pot instead of forcing it into the wrong container. For a compact cucumber, I would rather use a container in roughly the 5-gallon range or larger and give it a sturdy trellis than try to save space with a pot that dries out twice a day in summer. Once the container is ready and nights are reliably mild, transplant the cucumber. Water thoroughly after planting and watch moisture more closely as the vine begins to fill the trellis. The container is the same, its job is not. And the next handoff makes that idea even clearer, because sometimes the crop leaves, but the structure it used should stay exactly where it is. Spring peas can hand a trellis directly to pole beans. As the weather warms, pea vines may still look alive even while pod production is slowing. This is where gardeners often hesitate. They see green vines and think green automatically means productive. But ask a more useful question. Are the vines still flowering heavily? And are you still picking a worthwhile number of pods? Or are you protecting a crop that is clearly winding down? Sometimes, one extra week harvest from the old crop costs you a better planting window for the new one. When the peas are truly slowing, cut or pull the vines carefully. Remove diseased material completely. If the roots are healthy, you do not need to treat the container as sterile ground, but you still need to inspect the mix and drainage. Then keep the trellis. That support already fits the container. It is already anchored. The vertical growing space is already available. Once warm conditions suit beans, pole beans can take over that structure. Direct sow them about 1 inch deep, thin or space, according to the variety, and guide the first vines toward the trellis when they begin to reach. The peas are leaving because the weather is warming. The beans are arriving for the same reason. That is succession infrastructure. You are not only reusing potting space, you are reusing the job the trellis was built to do. Now, look at arugula. It gives a very different signal. As spring warms, the center of an arugula plant can begin stretching. A flower stalk develops, leaf texture and flavor change. This is bolting, and it simply means the plant is shifting energy away from producing the tender leaves you wanted and toward flowering and seed. Do not treat bolting as a personal failure. Treat it as information. If a compact pepper is your replacement crop, that pepper should not still be a seed packet when the arugula is already flowering. Peppers grow slowly at the beginning, compared with radishes or beans. In many climates, the pepper transplant needs to be started weeks earlier indoors, or purchased as a healthy transplant, so it is ready when warm conditions arrive. For one compact pepper, a 3 to 5 gallon container is a common practical range, with 5 gallons giving the roots and moisture reserve more room. If the arugula grew in a much smaller bowl, do not force the pepper into it simply because the bowl is now empty. Succession planning includes matching the next crop to the container. When the arugula is clearly bolting and your local nights are warm enough for pepper growth, remove the old plants, loosen the mix, refresh it as needed, and move the pepper in. Water deeply after transplanting. During the first several days, watch the plant for wilt in strong afternoon sun, especially if it came from a protected nursery environment. The lesson is simple. The replacement crop must be ready on the day the season asks for it. Baby turnips moving into bush zucchini push this idea even further. Turnips can finish while the weather is still shifting towards summer. Pull the roots, remove the remaining tops, and look at the container honestly. Was it wide enough only for a cluster of turnips? Is the mix badly compacted? Does water drain slowly? Has the pot settled several inches below the rim? Do not confuse an open pot with a ready pot. Bush zucchini needs much more space than baby turnips. I would look for a large container, often 10 gallons or more for one compact plant, with generous width and drainage. If the old turnip container is smaller, move the succession plan to a larger pot. The handoff is about timing, not forcing every crop into the same physical vessel. If the container is suitable, remove the turnip root debris, loosen the upper layer, restore the mix level, and set the zucchini transplant after warm conditions are established. Water the entire root zone instead of only wetting the surface around the stem. By now, the idea should be changing the way you look at your patio. The pea trellis is not finished when peas finish. The arugula pot is not automatically ready for a pepper just because it is empty. The turnip harvest does not guarantee the pot can support zucchini. And this is where the system begins to fail for many gardeners, because the pot may be ready before the replacement crop is. By the time real summer heat reaches the patio, that timing mistake becomes much harder to hide. Spring cilantro moving into a compact eggplant is a perfect example. Cilantro tells you about temperature very quickly. As conditions warm and days lengthen, the plants can rush upward and flower. You may still cut a few leaves, but the crop is changing jobs. If the compact eggplant that should replace it has not been started, you now have a timing problem. Eggplant is a warm season crop that wants heat. It also develops far more slowly from seed than cilantro. So this is not a handoff I plan on the morning I remove the cilantro. The eggplant transplant needs a head start. When the cilantro is bolting and the weather has truly warmed, remove the plants and inspect the container. One compact eggplant generally deserves a substantial pot. A 5-gallon container is a practical minimum starting point for many compact varieties. But more volume can make moisture and root management easier during hot weather. Refresh the mix as needed, set the transplant at the proper depth, water thoroughly, and give it a stake early if the variety or fruit load will need support. Here is the mistake I want you to avoid. Do not keep poor cilantro for another 2 weeks, simply because you enjoy the idea of squeezing out one more harvest. If those same 2 weeks are the best establishment window for the eggplant waiting beside it, the old crop does not get unlimited rights to the pot. Now consider bok choy, moving into dwarf okra. This is where I need to say something clearly. This is not a handoff for every American climate. Bok choy is comfortable in cooler conditions. Okra wants real warmth and a sufficiently long hot season. In a place with a short summer, a late frost, or an early fall frost, the available window may be too narrow for this sequence to make sense. Do not plant okra simply because a list told you to. Check the variety's days to maturity. Look at your local warm season window. Ask whether daytime heat and warm nights are actually arriving early enough. If the answer is no, reject the combo and choose a faster warm season crop. That ability to say no is part of good succession planning. Where the season is warm and long enough, the handoff can work beautifully. Harvest the bok choy before heat drives quality down. Remove the old roots, check drainage, and move the okra into a deep container with enough volume for one plant. For a dwarf type, think in the range of 5 gallons or more and use a deeper pot rather than a shallow bowl. Set the young plant only after cold stress is no longer a concern. This combination teaches a larger rule. The calendar is a plan. The plant and weather make the final decision. Early carrots moving into bush beans show the opposite side of the system, because not every replacement crop needs a transplant waiting beside the garden. Harvest the carrots when they reach the size you want. Pull the remaining roots, remove carrot tops, and work the surface carefully. Bush beans can be direct sown. That means your waiting line may be nothing more than a labeled seed packet and a planting date already chosen. Loosen the upper 4 inches of mix, level the surface, and sow the beans about 1 inch deep when the container has warmed enough for reliable bean germination. Keep the top layer evenly moist during germination, but do not leave the pot waterlogged. The bean seed does not need 3 weeks in a nursery cell. The plant still needs to exist before the carrots come out. And here is the conflict that catches people. The pot is ready. The weather is ready. The next crop is not. Maybe the seed is still in the mail. Maybe the transplant has not been started. Maybe the gardener thought, I will decide after harvest. That sounds harmless in spring, when there may be another window later. In the middle of a fast-moving season, the delay begins to matter much more. So before the next 3 handoffs, we need to correct one idea. Succession planting is not always harvest first, plant second. Sometimes, the second crop needs to begin its life somewhere else, while the first crop is still occupying the main container. This is where the crop waiting line begins. It does not need to be a greenhouse full of plants. On a small patio, it may be 1 cell tray, 4 2-inch nursery pots, and 3 3-inch pots set in a bright, protected place. Each one has a reason to exist. The kale is waiting for a potato container. The fall lettuce is waiting for basil to slow down. A compact pepper was started before the arugula bolted. But do not make the next mistake and start every crop in a cell tray. The waiting line is not always a line of seedlings. Sometimes it is a seed packet that is already in your hand, with the planting window already marked on your calendar. Carrots, radishes, and many other root crops are usually better direct sown where they will grow. The point is readiness, not transplanting everything. Now look at bush beans moving into fall spinach. The beans may still be producing in midsummer when you need to begin thinking about spinach. That feels early. The patio is hot. The bean leaves are full. Fall seems far away. But fall planting is where the phrase, I will decide later, becomes dangerous. Find your average first fall frost. Then look at the days to maturity on the spinach packet. Count backward. Because growth can slow, as daylight shortens and temperatures cool, do not plan to the final possible day. Give the crop breathing room. Depending on your climate and variety, that may mean the spinach decision happens while summer crops are still occupying the main containers. You might start a small group in cells where transplanting spinach works well in your conditions, or you might prepare to direct sow as soon as the bean pot opens. The exact method matters less than the timing logic. When bean production drops and the plants are clearly finishing, remove them. Check the upper root zone. Loosen the top 4 to 6 inches, restore the mix if it is settled, and prepare a fine surface for spinach seed. Sow about 1/2 inch deep, following packet spacing, and keep the upper layer consistently moist through germination. The important point is this: you started thinking about fall, while summer was still producing. Now take a declining cucumber vine and hand its container to fall radishes. Cucumbers can look dramatic at the end of the season. Leaves may yellow, disease pressure may build, fruit production can slow. This is a crop you should inspect honestly rather than keeping it, because the trellis still looks green from across the yard. If the vine is diseased, remove the affected material and do not compost it unless your composting method reliably handles that disease. Clear the trellis, pull the root crown, then look at the mix. For radishes, you want a loose upper root zone. Remove the coarse root debris and break up compacted areas. Add fresh mix where the container has settled. Then direct sow the radishes about 1/4 to 1/2 inch deep, following the seed packet for spacing and thinning. Do not move radish seedlings from a waiting tray into this container simply because you liked the waiting line idea. The radish waiting line may be a seed packet scheduled for the day the cucumber comes out. That is why this system is not about creating extra chores. It is about eliminating indecision. Now go to a deep container of early potatoes moving into kale. This handoff starts with the harvest itself. Tip or open the potato container carefully. Remove the tubers. Check for small potatoes left behind. Pull out the large stems and root debris. Potato containers often settle significantly over the season, so do not assume the remaining volume is still what you started with. Check drainage. Restore the growing mix. If the old mix is badly broken down or compacted, replace part of it with fresh container mix rather than filling the pot with heavy garden soil. Blend in compost or fertilizer according to the needs of the kale and the condition of the mix. And this is where the waiting line earns its space. A kale transplant can be ready in a small nursery pot while the potatoes are still underground. When the container opens, the kale does not begin from seed. It arrives with a small root system and several healthy leaves, ready to establish. Set the transplant at the appropriate depth. Firm the mix gently and water the whole root zone. During warm late summer weather, protect the young plant from severe transplant stress and keep moisture steady while it establishes. This is what closes the empty pot gap. Not more containers, not a bigger patio, a small waiting line of the right crop started at the right time. And now that the next crop is waiting, we can use the same idea in reverse as summer begins to loosen its grip. The cool weather crops that disappeared in spring are about to start coming back. Bush zucchini, moving into turnips, is one of the clearest examples of a heavy summer container changing back to a fine-seeded, cool season crop. After weeks of large leaves, fast growth, and repeated watering, a zucchini container can be physically tired. That does not mean the potting mix is dead. It means you need to inspect what the next crop is inheriting. Cut the zucchini stem and remove the root mass. Look for dense roots. Check whether water has been running down the sides instead of soaking through the center. Loosen the upper 4 to 6 inches. Remove large woody roots and badly compacted chunks. Add fresh mix to restore the surface. For turnips, prepare a finer sowing zone than the zucchini needed. Large empty pockets and coarse root debris make it harder to get even stands of small seedlings. Sow the seed about 1/2 inch deep and thin according to the variety. Succession planting does not mean treating a container like a hotel room, where one crop checks out and another checks in without anyone preparing the room. There is another reason to pause during these summer to fall resets. Water behavior can change even when the container looks full. Before sowing the next crop, water the pot slowly and watch what happens. If water immediately escapes down one side while the center stays dusty, the mix may have pulled away from the container wall or become difficult to re-wet. Break up the dry channels gently. Add fresh moistened mix where needed, and water in 2 slow passes a few minutes apart. Small fall seeds need a consistently moist upper layer during germination. A container that was managed for a mature zucchini or basil plant may need a different watering rhythm once it is holding tiny turnip, arugula, or lettuce seedlings. The handoff includes changing how you water, not only changing the crop. The next crop inherits what the old crop leaves behind, now moved from edamame to arugula. This handoff gives us a chance to correct a gardening story that is often simplified too much. Yes, legumes work with nitrogen-fixing bacteria. No, that does not mean every container that held beans or edamame is automatically fertilized forever and ready to feed any crop without inspection. You harvested the edamame pods. The plant used nutrients to build stems, leaves, roots, and seeds. If you remove the entire plant and harvest the pods, do not pretend you have deposited a free bag of fertilizer into the pot. Remove the plants, check the root zone, refresh the mix based on its condition. Then direct sow arugula when temperatures are moving back toward a range it prefers. Sow shallowly, around 1/4 inch deep, and keep the surface from drying hard during germination. This is a small detail, but it matters because good systems are built on honest observations, not slogans. Now look at basil, moving into fall lettuce. Basil may still look beautiful in late summer. You may be pinching leaves, making pesto, and cutting flower tips. But watch the nights. Watch the growth rate. In many climates, the basil's useful season will begin closing as cool weather approaches. Your fall lettuce should already exist in the waiting line. That may mean seedlings started roughly 3 to 4 weeks before you expect the basil container to open, depending on the variety and local conditions. The goal is not to produce a huge root-bound lettuce plant. The goal is to have a sturdy young transplant ready with several true leaves. When the basil clearly slows and cold risk is approaching, harvest what you can use. Remove the stems and roots. Loosen the upper layer. Refresh the mix. Then set the lettuce transplant in the same container if the depth and width are appropriate. Water gently but thoroughly. If the days are still warm, give the transplant a little protection from severe afternoon heat during establishment. As conditions cool, the lettuce begins taking advantage of the very weather that is pushing basil out. This is the crop waiting line working exactly as intended. A few handoffs ago, the garden was moving from cool crops into heat. Now, the direction has reversed. Turnips, arugula, and lettuce are returning because summer is giving up space. The system feels easy now. The crops seem to be taking turns. But the next handoffs are where the clock becomes much less forgiving. The average first frost is no longer a distant date. It is becoming the deadline behind every decision. In spring, a late decision may cost you convenience. In fall, it can cost you the planting window. This is where I want you to use a very simple calculation. Find the average first frost for your area. Then find the days to maturity for the crop and variety you plan to grow. Count backward. After that, give yourself extra breathing room because fall growth can slow as the days shorten and temperatures cool. Do not build a plan that only works if every seed germinates on time, every week is warm, and the first frost politely arrives later than average. A seed packet gives you a useful number. It does not give you control over the season. Now consider tomato moving into garlic. Late-season tomato plants can hold gardeners emotionally. There are green fruits on the vine. A few flowers remain. The plant is still technically alive, but eventually the productive window closes. Cold threatens. Disease may be increasing. The fruit is no longer ripening well. When that point arrives, harvest what can be used or ripened indoors, remove the plant, and take time with the root ball. Tomato roots can occupy a large portion of the container. Pull the main mass, remove thick roots, and inspect the structure of the mix. Garlic is a different kind of handoff, because it may occupy the container through the cold season and into the following growing year. This is not a promise of a winter garlic harvest. It is an overwintering plan. Use healthy planting garlic suitable for your region. Separate the cloves shortly before planting. Set each clove pointed end up, generally about 2 to 3 inches deep, and space according to the variety and container width. In colder climates, the container itself may need protection because roots in pots experience temperature swings more severely than roots in the ground. The container has moved from a summer fruiting crop into a long cold season commitment. Now, take a pepper container and move it toward protected spinach. Again, I need to be precise. Protection can extend a useful growing window. It does not erase your climate. A frost cloth, low tunnel, protected patio position, or cold frame style setup can help moderate cold and protect leaves from light frost depending on the material and conditions. It does not turn a January night in a severe northern winter into spring. So when the pepper is slowing, and your fall calculation shows enough time for spinach to establish, prepare the replacement crop. Remove the pepper after the final useful harvests. Clear the thick root crown, loosen and refresh the upper mix. Then sow or transplant spinach based on the system you prepared earlier. If you use frost cloth, support it so heavy material is not crushing tender leaves. Secure the edges against wind. On mild days, monitor heat buildup in enclosed protection and provide ventilation when necessary. The promise here is not harvest all winter everywhere. The promise is to carry a cool season container farther into cold weather when your climate and protection allow it. Now, for a crop many American gardeners overlook, marsh, also called corn salad. Summer beans moving into marsh can be a useful cold season handoff in climates, and planting windows where this slow, cool-loving green has time to establish. Marsh forms low rosettes of mild leaves. It prefers cool conditions and can tolerate colder weather better than many common salad greens once established, but it is not a fast summer crop. Read the seed packet carefully. If your window is already too short, save the idea for another season or use a faster, cool season green. When summer beans finish, remove the old plants, clear coarse roots, and prepare a fine seed surface. Sow the marsh slowly, according to packet directions, usually around 1/4 inch deep, and keep the surface evenly moist while it germinates. Because germination and early growth can be slower than radish, this is exactly the kind of crop that rewards planning before the bean pot opens. The surprise is that the next crop does not have to look like the last crop. A productive summer bean container can become a low winter salad container. A tomato pot can become an overwintering garlic pot. A pepper container can become protected spinach. The pot is allowed to change jobs. There is one final rotation left. It looks almost too simple, but it teaches the difference between repeating a crop and building a real succession system. For the last pot, we are going back to radishes. Radish to fall spinach. At first, this seems less interesting than tomato to garlic or peas to pole beans. It is the same small root crop twice, but succession planting has more than one rhythm. You can replace one crop with a different crop. You can also sow the same crop in planned intervals, so every plant does not mature at once. Then, when that seasonal window begins to close, you can hand the space to a different crop entirely. Start the first radish sowing in a suitable cool window. Sow shallowly, usually 1/4 to 1/2 inch deep depending on the seed and mix, and keep the upper layer moist through germination. Do not pour the entire packet into the container simply because you like radishes. Plan the second sowing. For many quick crops, a 7 to 14 day interval is a useful planning range, but do not turn 14 days into a law. Temperature, variety, germination speed, and your actual harvest pace matter. The point is to avoid one huge flush, followed by nothing. You may use a separate section of a wide container for the second sowing, or clear the first section as roots are harvested and replant immediately. Keep notes. If the second planting catches the first, because weather suddenly warms, widen the interval next time. If the first planting disappears from the kitchen faster than expected, shorten the interval while the season allows. Then, watch the season. At some point, the best decision is not a third radish sowing. The cooler fall window and your frost calculation may tell you to hand the container to spinach. That is the difference between repeating a habit and running a system. The system asks 3 questions. What is slowing down? What weather is coming? What crop is waiting? You do not need 19 containers to use these 19 ideas. Imagine only 3 pots. Pot A begins with spinach in cool weather. As the spinach window closes, bush beans take over for summer. When the beans slow and the fall window returns, spinach comes back. Cool to warm to cool. Pot B begins with fast radishes in a large container that will later support a patio tomato. The radishes leave. The tomato takes over the long, warm season. When the tomato finishes, you do not force a fall crop that has no time. You look at the local window and choose the next realistic job for that container. Perhaps garlic, where the climate and planting schedule fit. Pot C uses vertical space. Peas climb in cool weather. Pole beans take over the same support in warm weather. When the beans finish, a cool season crop can use the pot if enough time remains. That is not a universal planting calendar. It is a decision framework. The exact crops will change. Your frost dates will change the timing. A gardener in Texas may reject a sequence that works in Maine, and a gardener in Maine may begin fall planning while a southern gardener is still managing intense summer heat. But the questions do not change. Know what is slowing down. Know what weather is coming. Know what crop is waiting. And remember that waiting does not always mean a tray of seedlings. Sometimes it is a 3-inch pot with a kale transplant. Sometimes it is spinach seed already purchased. Sometimes it is garlic stored for the correct planting window. Sometimes it is simply a note on your calendar telling you that the second radish sowing belongs 7 to 14 days after the first, adjusted by what the weather and the crop are actually doing. The goal was never to memorize 19 combinations. The goal was to stop seeing a harvested pot as the end of something. Once you notice what is slowing down, understand the weather that is coming, and prepare the next crop before the space opens. The container begins to move with the season instead of waiting behind it. A finished crop becomes a signal. A cleared trellis becomes a tool for the next vine. A deep potato pot becomes space for a kale transplant. A summer bean container becomes a place for a cool season green. The empty pot is no longer the moment you start planning. It is the moment your earlier plan takes over. So, the next time you pull the last radish, cut the final cucumber vine, or clear a tired pepper plant, pause before you carry the pot to the side of the patio. Look at the weather. Look at the calendar. Look at what is already waiting. Then keep the pot moving.